Hello and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin Public Affairs Forum. This forum is held weekly on Sundays at noon, and you can find details and schedule at austinuu.org. I would like to introduce Dale Beulah, who will now introduce this morning's speaker.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning, everyone. This morning we have the honor of having a special guest, Jim Marston, who is the Vice President of Energy Program and Director of the Texas Regional Office for the Texas Environmental Defense Fund. And he's going to talk to us today about global warming. His energy efforts have been going on for quite some time. As you can imagine, living in Texas, it would take quite some time. He led the fight to successfully stop TXU from building their dozens of coal plants. And so, yes. And the thing I like about Jim is he just doesn't talk about these things. He actually gets out there and helps do something about it. So he's going to talk to us today about the climate change, its effect on Texas, and we hope you'll have lots of good questions for him. Jim Marston, would you come up, please?
Thank you for having me. I've heard about this Public Affairs Forum for a long time, and I'm glad to be a part of it. You know, if you listen to some of the elected officials in Texas, you would think there's some grand conspiracy by the federal government to oppress Texas by asking us to do something about global warming. Sometimes it sounds like it's the second coming of they're worried that it's the second coming of the carpetbaggers and the Yankees are coming in to take over. And they always talk about how horrible it will be to Texas if we reduce our greenhouse gases. And I want to really, I'm going to focus mainly today on why, if we would do something to reduce our terrible share of the carbon pollution, that it'd actually be good for our economy. But let me start with just a few basic backgrounds. There's always this discussion about whether greenhouse gases are really causing the earth to warm. Senator Inhofe in Oklahoma, where I had the unfortunate experience of going to high school, calls it a great hoax. Let me just make sure everybody understands how simple it is to understand what's going on. It's basic physics. So there's a reason why you call these gases greenhouse gases. They're odorless, they're clear, but they act like glass on a greenhouse. The light comes in, like it does in a greenhouse, and then some of the heat leaves. The thicker you make the glass, the less heat escapes. That is how it is with our atmosphere. These greenhouse gases are clear, but the thicker you make them, the less heat escapes. We have to have some of these greenhouse gases, or our planet would be like Mars, uninhabitable. But what we've been doing since the industrial age is adding thickness to our glass. Nobody disputes that. I mean, we can measure it, and the parts per billion are adding up very rapidly now. The glass equivalent's getting thicker, and less heat is escaping, and our planet is warming up. Those of you who live in Texas like I do know that 95 is hot in the summer, but the last two summers when it's been 110 or 112 is intolerable. And unfortunately, that may be the new normal. And we're going to have to figure out how to adjust to that. But apart from the new normal, we ought to figure out how to slow down the warming and what we can do about it. So a few years ago, the Supreme Court was faced with a question, and that is, does the Clean Air Act require EPA to regulate greenhouse gases? And the Supreme Court ruled yes. The words are clear. It is a broad set of pollution, and it covers climate pollution. So the Supreme Court ordered EPA to do something about climate, even while we wait for Congress to pass a more comprehensive piece of legislation. Under the Bush administration, Bush 2, EPA moved forward with the first step, which is something that called endangerment finding. In order to regulate, not only does the pollutant have to be covered, but if we don't act, there has to be harm to humans and the environment. The Bush EPA made it a finding and sent it over to the Bush White House through an email. And guess what the Bush White House did? They didn't open the email. And they pretended like, therefore, there was no endangerment finding. Along comes the new administration, Obama administration. You know what they do? They open the email and then look at it again and agree with the Bush administration or the Bush EPA saying, yes, this is a dangerous pollutant that EPA is required to regulate, and begins to do so. And that's when Texas, our current Texas officials kind of lose their mind. They've done all sorts of things, filed 11 lawsuits against EPA. Attorney General Abbott's lawsuits range from frivolous to absurd, attacking the science. Like he and his folks at the Attorney General's office really know the science better than the scientists around the world. Latch on to some silly fight over some emails have been discredited many times over, and the scientific groups have gone back and said, while there's a little dust up on the emails, the underlying science is confirmed by tens of thousands of scientists. Governor Perry claims this is an intentional attack on the economy of Texas, designed to harm our economy. That's why they're doing this. And then we have fake studies from our agencies. The Texas PUC, this is my favorite study. They did a real hard study looking at the harm that would come to Texas. And they properly showed that some oil jobs could be affected. But it's supposed to be a cost-benefit analysis. And they say, well, there also will be some benefits to the state, but it's too hard for us to figure out, so we're just going to assume there are no benefits and it's all cost. That's what I did when I got it. I literally laughed. And I was probably not very polite to reporters. I called them a few names, not 4 letters, but things like unscientific, biased, and embarrassing. But that's what Texas officials did. And frankly, they're not unlike folks of the turn of the century who wanted to protect the buggy equipment manufacturers from the automobile. Yes, we're going to have a new economy. That's the opportunity for Texas. So there are lots of studies about who's going to win and who's going to lose in a new carbon-constrained economy. And some states will be doing better than others, there's no doubt about it. West Virginia, probably going to be a loser, but frankly, the best thing for them is they can get some of their people out of the coal mines and quit having black lung disease and maybe educate their folks and do something other than treat them as 19th century pack animals. Actually be good for them to have to confront the future. But there are lots of states that are going to win. And here are the characteristics of the states that will win in a carbon-constrained economy. States that have a lot of natural gas. By the way, there's going to be a little theme here. Number 2, states that have a lot of sun. States that have a lot of wind. States that have geologic formations where you used oil in old fields and now there's vacant areas down there with still a little bit of old oil that you could put CO2, the main greenhouse gas, put it down underground and get that old oil out where you can't do otherwise. States that have geothermal, states that have a lot of coastline where the wind blows a lot. I wonder what state that might be. Yeah, the fact is, and by the way, there's lots of other opportunities. How about states that have a clean tech, clean energy economy? Maybe Austin area, Houston. And also states that have not been very efficient in their building stock or in their energy use, who who have not done the things that California or New York or some other states do, which is to upgrade your buildings, but have a big potential to catch up. Well, obviously, all those things are Texas. So I want you to know that we have a big chance to win here. And the question is, do we invest our money, invest our education, invest our policy in the future, or do we protect the buggy whip type companies? And frankly, even our oil companies, because of this enhanced oil recovery opportunity, because locally produced oil will be worth more because we won't want to have all the greenhouse gases associated with importing oil. It makes our oil more competitive with Middle East oil, among other things. And yes, it'll be less used around the world, but a lot of it will still be Texas. So I want to go through a little bit of each of those. So I simplified what the world is like. And a lot of people, when you say, oh, gas, or you say wind energy, they're going to say, oh, it won't work, or can't work, or we're going to have to change our lifestyle terribly. I'm going to give you just a little bit of things to say in the elevator or at the coffee pot, or when you're talking to your friends when they try to tell you this is all pie in the sky. Let me first start with gas. And I think we all need to understand it's a little more complex than gas being better than coal. And particularly because gas is overwhelming at least Texas and a lot of other states. So gas is better than coal when burned as a fuel in an electric boiler. About 50% better. We can make a lot of progress there just switching out our coal. And even though Texas, you don't think of it as a coal state, I think we have the second most coal mining in the country, and we have a lot of our power coming from 1970s generation coal plants. So we're supposed to last 40 years. We're repowering and keeping them up to date rather than replacing them. Gas is better, but it needs to be done right to really have great inputs or great impact. So methane is what natural gas is. Methane. And it's a greenhouse gas, just like carbon dioxide, but it's more potent per pound. And depending on what time period you look at, it's 22 or 27 or 72 times more potent on a pound basis. So if you leak a little methane into production or transportation, it takes away the benefits of natural gas over coal as a boiler fuel. So it's critical that we have the leaking of methane to be very, very small. Dale talked about, there's an announcement this week, 9 natural gas companies have agreed to work with us on a study to actually measure how much is leaking, because nobody knows. If we have a leakage rate of 3% or more, natural gas is not better than coal, so we've got to get it right, and we've got to reduce the amount to a very, very small amount. The good news is what they're leaking is product. This is what they could sell if they didn't have it going out in the atmosphere, so they ought to want to reduce this if they believe that it's a significant number. So gas is better. It is abundant in Texas. We have a great opportunity, but we've got to do it right. Now, a lot of people are going to tell you solar and wind is nice, but it's kind of boutique. It doesn't really matter. Oh, yeah, the Unitarians have a solar array, but there's not one in the First Baptist Church or at River Bend. I mean, those are serious folks. And they'll tell you a lot of things, like it costs too much, or it's intermittent. The sun doesn't shine all the time. We have to do other things to back it up. Well, you all probably know that the cost of solar has come down dramatically. The technology's improved. And so it is starting to be competitive. And wind already is very, very cheap in Texas. In fact, it's so cheap that at night sometimes the bid from the companies approach zero. I mean, it's almost free. We don't even use all the wind. If we could figure out how to use more electricity at night in less than a day, we could dramatically lower our electric bills, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But solar, luckily for us, solar works at the time of day and the season of the year when we need electricity the most. It's a great fit for our peaking power. We can run some other plants in the winter or at night, but solar works when we really need it the most in the summer. So it really does match up with our need. That's a great thing about it. But in addition to the fact that solar fits our electricity needs, we also have some new technologies that are coming along. You all probably heard about clean tech and clean energy. And that talks about a whole host of technologies that are a little bit like the Jetsons. Some of you are as old as me, so you know who the Jetsons are. I get to speak sometimes to college kids, and unless they saw reruns of the cartoons, they don't know who that is. I used to use the Buck Rogers analogy, and nobody knew what it was. But in any event, the Jetsons was a cartoon in the future with all sorts of great things and remote control and sensors and things turning on and off. Well, the Jetsons are here, by the way. There's so many technologies out there. For instance, it's a company now that has tied to your iPhone. It knows where you are. It's tied to your electricity system. When you leave, it turns everything off. You don't have to remember to turn things off, including your air conditioning. And then when you get about 2 miles from your house, it turns the air conditioner back on, so it cools things off. When you get to the house, it turns everything on, including those clocks. And the clocks now can be smart enough where they're turned off. They don't go 12 or 12 or 12. They remember what time. And so we can turn off all sorts of standby electricity that we're wasting right now with technology. And so that means we don't need as much electricity. But the good news also is we have the ability to use this technology with our renewable resources like solar and wind that are intermittent. I admit that the sun doesn't shine all the time. I know the wind doesn't blow all the time. But it doesn't mean when the sun's not shining we can't do other things that are smarter than turning on a dirty fossil fuel plant. What we can do is have, with this new technology, sensors that knows immediately when the clouds come over the solar array and immediately send signals to our electric appliances that are non-essential and say, don't work right now. We don't have solar. Turn off your hot water heater, your swimming pool pump, your defroster. You can't wash your dishes right then. And when the solar comes back, the sun comes out again, turn that back on. Or even better yet, program all those things to run it in the middle of the night when we have all this wasted wind, which is almost free. And by the way, we can program them so you don't have to get up in the middle of the night to do that. Less costly, smarter, cleaner, good for Texas. No sacrifice. Now, I won't say there's not no sacrifice we have to do, but sacrifices are probably things we ought to do, you know. So I've had to teach myself when I want to go down to the store, and it's, you know, I only live like half a mile from the store. My doctor's always griping at me for not exercising enough, and I have this excuse. I have a really important job. I don't have time to do this. And then after he told me I had flunked my physical for the 3rd year in a row, and I had to get serious, I tried to figure out how do I put this in my life. So my sacrifice now is walk 10 minutes to the store and walk back. We do need some changes like that, but the truth is on the energy side, we can still have this great economy if we use our technology, if we're smarter, if we recognize the things that we can do for Texas. And I do want to talk to you a little bit about a couple things that people will get asked about, and that's things like coal. Do we have to in coal forever. Maybe is the answer. If we get technology that's cleaner, doesn't hurt us with local pollution, and really reduces their greenhouse gases, okay, let it go. But if they can't compete, we're supposed to be in a capitalist system, and we're subsidizing them left and right. We're acting like the pollution has no cost, and we pay for things out of your taxpayer money, like to cover black lung disease of the thousands of people that are killed every year from being coal miners and breathing that dust. Then they don't win if they don't pay for that cost themselves, in my opinion. But the opportunity, of course, is to capture the CO2 pollution and keep it out of the atmosphere. And at least one idea is to put it in a pipeline, take it to old oil fields, use the pressure to get oil out of there. The nice thing about it is we wouldn't have to drill in Alaska or offshore in pristine places. We can use parts of Texas and Oklahoma we already screwed up and still have oil for your car. So Dale wanted to make sure I talked to you about also what we all can do. We do need policies. We do need, frankly, different elected officials in Texas who are thinking about the future, not about who gave them money. The amount of subsidies we continue to give to old industries is staggering. They act like we're subsidizing solar and wind at some outrageous amounts, but it's not even close. And let me be clear, I'm not anti-oil company. My dad worked for companies that are now part of BP for 34 years, and I pray every day for the health of BP because my mother's pension and health insurance is dependent upon them continuing to be able to pay. So I was a little nervous about that oil spill out in the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm not anti-oil, but I am pro-future. The idea is we've got to get ready for the new economy. We cannot continue to absorb the amount of atmosphere of pollution in the atmosphere. There's an oil executive who was on our Texas Advisory Board and says what we're doing now is doing an uncontrolled science experiment on our atmosphere. We don't know where it's going to end. It could be bad. It could be catastrophic. The bad news is some of the things that the scientists predicted would happen in 20 years are happening now. The melting of the Arctic ice pack is happening a lot faster than we thought. They're very concerned about the permafrost melting and the methane that's been there for hundreds of thousands of years getting into the atmosphere. We've had some pretty scary things about what's happening in the ocean. And, even things we can see in Texas. We're not supposed to have West Nile virus in Texas. West Nile virus is from, that's where it's supposed to be from, the West Nile in the equator. And we have dengue fever in Texas. These are tropical diseases that were tropical. What happens now is those kind of diseases are moving north and south, and the mosquitoes that used to die off in the colder winters are not dying at the same rate. We have some pretty scary things happening. So yes, we need new officials. We need you all to vote for people who care about clean energy. It's against the law for me to tell you who to vote for, so I won't do that. I can't do that with my EDF hat on, and even though it's Sunday, I'm going to pretend like I'm working today. But also lots of things you can do individually. Number one, City of Austin continues to have a green energy program that you can sign up for. And sometimes it's open, sometimes it's closed, and when it's available, pick cleaner energy. Encourage the city council to go for clean energy in the electricity sector, because that, along with cars, are the two biggest things that we can control. About 75 or 80% of our greenhouse gas pollution comes from those two things. So clean energy policies in your lifestyle at your church. Look for opportunities like you've done here to make your own home more efficient. That generally pays off. I won't tell you to spend a lot of things that you spend money on a lot of things that don't pay off. The good news, a lot of these investments save you money in a very short time. Good investment, better than the stock market's been in the last several years. Put the money where you know you're going to make money and also reduce your pollution. Your car matters. When you drive matters, short drives matter, but also the difference between driving a fuel-efficient vehicle and driving one that's not matters a lot too. Figure out what you need a vehicle for. If you need a car for work that need, a big pickup truck for work, do that. I guess if you're a teenage boy and need one to pick up girls, maybe drive one, but the rest of us don't need big pickup trucks. We need a car for what we want, and so get the car that's appropriate and one that saves you money and is less polluting. And finally, don't be afraid to speak up. I think the other side, whether it's political folks or folks on the radio or our coworkers, have kind of told us, oh, you're making this up. It's a pipe dream. It's too expensive. You're going to hurt Texas. That's not real. We need to be saying we're the future, you're the past, you don't have the science. And if they ever want to argue the science, I'll give you one last thing to do. So Texas A&M University, not exactly the most liberal university in the country, but they do have a very good atmospheric science department. Very good. And they sent a letter to Governor Perry, who's an Aggie and pretends he respects his university, but this will show the truth about him. So their atmospheric science department sent this letter. We are all of the tenured and tenure-track faculty members of the atmospheric science department at Texas A&M University. We say these things unanimously. Global warming is happening. It's caused largely by humans. And if we don't do something soon, it could be catastrophic. So when anybody wants to debate the science, I say that you can find one university in the entire world where all the experts in the field, atmospheric science, say all those things are not true, then we have a scientific debate. Otherwise, shut up and listen to the Aggies. So let me I promise to leave a lot of time for questions, so let me do that right now. Thanks a lot for having me, by the way.
If you do have a question, raise your hand and I will come around. I'll try to get you in the right order.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is more of a comment, but I think the wind energy in Texas vastly needs to be increased, especially up in the Panhandle. And I moved 2 years ago from Iowa. Iowa's a much smaller state than Texas, but in fact, I'm very impressed with what they've done with wind energy. They have the wind generators all over the place. And particularly in western Iowa. Now, Texas, I grew up in the Panhandle. I know wind up there is just as bad as it is in Iowa, and it's just colder in Iowa is the only difference. But anyway, I think when there was a vast improvement can be made in the generation of energy by wind here in Texas, and that's one thing that needs to be done in the future.
I agree with you, and I make fun of Texas environmental policies a lot, but let me say one thing we did well early on was wind. In 1999, I'm proud of being part of a deal with Governor Bush at the time. In return for some changes that he wanted, legislators and we said we would support it if we could get a lot of new wind required. We struck a deal for 2,000 new megawatts of wind. That was not an accidental number. That actually would double the amount of utility-scale wind in the country. We bet that if we could double the amount in the country, we'd get economies of scale, the cost would go down, the quality would go up, we could prove it would work. Some of the folks in the industry said the sky would fall, our rates would go up 20%, and we had brownouts. They proved to be wrong. We were right. It jump-started wind in the country. We still had the most wind of any place, now about 10,000 megawatts. But on a percentage basis, a number of states, including Iowa and Minnesota, have surpassed us. Though at our best, on our best days, we're now getting, though, an amazing amount of our electricity from wind, some days more than 20%. Really impressive number. But just because we were good or best a while ago doesn't mean we ought not to follow the example of Iowa.
Thank you so much for being here and for your common sense comments about the environment. You mentioned earlier that our church has solar power. I wonder, and then you said that you mentioned a few other churches and they didn't have anything like that. Is there any modeling that a church like ours could do, or is there any other things? We have a church green sanctuary committee here, for example, and we try to build a consciousness about green sanctuary. Do you have any thoughts about how we can do a better job here at our own church and how we can model some of the things we're doing for other churches?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, it's been a few years since you put your solar on, as I remember. So the technology's gotten better. You might want to bring some people in to see if there's new, lower cost and new technology. Number two, there's a group called, let's see if I can do this, Sally Bingham, who is an EDF National Board member, but also is an Episcopal priest. And I think you all may be part of this. But work with them and be part of their outreach to other church. It's called Faith, Power, and Light. And they're really trying to get to churches, to have churches do energy efficiency and do solar and other clean energy at their site, but educate folks. So be part of that team. A big thing to do. And then, I would, you're, at the PTA or whatever club you're at, talk about how cool it is and how much money your church is saving by doing clean energy.
I'm wondering if there's any validity to the possible link between fracking and earthquakes, for example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And if there is a link, is there any concern about putting CO2 into the ground, into these old oil fields where it really doesn't belong?
Very good question. Gosh, I'm going to have to give a little longer answer because it's a little complicated. First, let me just say a little broader question about fracking because it gets so much press. There's no doubt there are thousands of examples of oil pollution harming local communities and local landowners from wells that use fracking. And so when the oil and gas companies tell you no problem, they're misleading a little bit. It's also true that the fracking itself, it's also called hydraulic fracturing, which is using pressure and sand and water and explosions down below, often more than a mile down, does not seem to be causing there's very few documented cases of pollution from that exercise because the distance is so great from the surface waters or the aquifers, maybe more than a mile apart. Now, there have been a few cases of earthquakes, a couple in Europe where they've actually been from the fracking itself, minor. But the earthquakes, there have been a few earthquakes in the U.S., one around the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, one in Ohio that got some press. Those are actually not from the breaking the rocks, but you're leading the right direction. They've been putting the wastewater back underground in an underground injection well. And not serious earthquakes yet, but some risk of that. So what we really think the science tells us is be smart where you put that stuff. You need to do geologic testing and not put it in certain places. The Chesapeake is the one who caused the earthquake around Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And if they had been trying to hit a fault, they probably could not have been better at doing that. It was unbelievable at random they did that. But a little testing would have told them not to put it there. We probably also ought to operate the injection wells differently. Probably the amount of pressure we put down, in other words, the speed we put the fluid back down makes a difference. Take a little longer. Both those things seem to make a difference. We just need to be smarter. We need to do 20 or 30 different things with regard to oil and gas production. That's one of them. We ought to be worried about it, but it's probably not from the fracking. It's from the injection of the fluids there. So that brings it to your real question, which is what to do about putting CO2 underground. Again, not every place. Be careful. Figure out how you do it. You need to monitor. And there probably are limits, by the way. I mean, like, when I say that coal could operate under those conditions, yes, but for a limited time and a limited amount of CO2. So I would see that as a transition, not as something we want to do in 50 years or 30 years, but how to use our current coal plants in a way that keep them going for a few years as we transition away. I know it's a long answer, but it's a pretty important question you ask.
I wonder if you could help me with a little moral dilemma that I have a number of times.
Okay.
Here?
Yeah, that's it.
If you could help me with a little moral dilemma that I have.
Don't do
4 or 5 times. Well, so the dilemma is, you said that we should communicate with people, and you were talking about legislators and people in power. But often I see people sitting in parking lots or on curbs idling their cars with the windows up. Yesterday there were 2 women, looking at their cell phone. They had their windows up across the street from my house. Beautiful cloudy day. No reason not to have the windows down and turn off the engine. So is it my responsibility as a former Girl Scout and citizen that I should communicate with people in a friendly way when they're polluting the air that belongs to all of us for their own little momentary comfort?
So you're asking, are we our brother's keeper? Is that the question you're asking?
Well, but it's part of all of us.
No, it's a very, I'm sorry, I actually meant that as a serious answer. Look, I think we need to try to get anti-idling policies and education generally. We've worked with a local group here called the Clean Air Force of Central Texas, who's been working at schools. Think about the lines of the mothers and fathers picking up their kids. And some of them get there a half hour, 45 minutes in advance. They got a lot of free time, apparently. And run their cars for their air conditioners on for 30, 45 minutes. Among other things, getting a little cloud of pollution around there, their kids get to walk through when they come pick them up. In addition to all the area and global pollution they're causing. So we have a policy there that says don't idle. We got the school buses to have rules against idling. I think the answer is, if it's easy and you don't think they have guns in their car, ask them to, people you know. I don't tell everybody you have to fix everything every time. And, if you don't, I just think you got to do that on a case-by-case basis and recognize that do what you can within reason, but you can't beat yourself up about not solving every problem every time.
Good advice.
Yeah, thanks for everything. I appreciated you talking about the transition. I think it's important for people to understand, and it's a point you didn't make, is that when we look 100 years out in the future, or even 50 years out in the future, we really need to aim for a world where there's no carbon being burned at all, and or at least no net carbon being released, and ways to capture that carbon and get it out of the way at the very least. I also, I think about this stuff all the time, and I think that getting Texas on board and getting the Texas energy industry on board is a really positive thing to do. Texas shouldn't be dragging our feet. We should be leading in this. We are in a position to lead. We've got the wind, we've got the solar, and we also have the universities which are really strong in the energy industry. and we should be the world's leader, not the world's, dragging their feet. But I'm a little concerned about the fracking thing, and Bill McKibben was here at South by Southwest Eco last week. I don't know if you were there. And he said, well, there's this question as to whether gas is a bridge to the future or a rickety pier out into a pool of fossil energy. And the question is, if we're gonna bet on this stuff, are we not going to give more momentum to fossil fuel burning out in the future and make it harder to make that transition into the future where we're not burning fossil fuels at all?
Well, you and Bill McKibben are asking the most important question of our decade, I think. What is our moral obligation and how do we fulfill it? And what is our responsibility now to get there? There's a couple things I think we ought to understand. If all we're doing is building a world that coal replaces gas into the indefinite future of the next 20 years, I can't use that S we're just out of luck. How about that? Really bad thing. If in the short term we can quickly decrease the amount of coal we're using, replace it with gas, and have a transition to a true clean economy, then we'll be okay. In the world I wish we were in, we would have passed climate legislation, we would have a new international accord, and we would have mandatory numbers that show we're going to get to the goal that the scientists tell us, which is 80% less CO2 in 2050 than we have now, and the number continues to go down after that. But we're getting reductions in the interim. The legislation didn't pass. The international agreement did not come to pass. No matter who wins this election, I don't think there's going to be 60 votes in the Senate to pass a comprehensive climate legislation. I'm the head of the energy program at the Environmental Defense Fund, one of the big national groups. My job was supposed to be what came after climate legislation. Now it's what comes instead. What can we do on energy without legislation? And so gas is a potential there. This clean technology stuff I talked about is a big bet with us. But let me give you I'll give you a couple of numbers. 24,000 oil and gas wells were drilled in the U.S. last year alone. Okay? 90% of the onshore oil and gas new onshore oil and gas wells are now using fracking. Only saying I'm against fracking is a little bit like saying you're against automobiles. Maybe you ought to be, but it didn't really matter very much. They're a fact of life. So the question is, can we make the cars cleaner? Can we make the oil and gas a lot cleaner? And so we've done some calculations that if we could reduce the amount of methane leaking from the current operations by about 2/3 of what EPA estimates, to get the leak rate down to about 1%, that's better than replacing let's see if I get this number right. Now, replacing half of the coal plants with gas and 1/3 renewables. It's a big number. It's a short-term opportunity to allow the politics to get better and let the cleaner technologies take over. We're a little worried about the trend, and we got to slow it down. So we're betting a little bit on things we can do in the short term while we hope for this better economy. I love Bill McKibben. I think he is, this is probably not too strong to say he's the Martin Luther King Jr. of the environmental movement. He shows us the moral compass, and he holds the rest of us accountable for the right thing. I think Bill also recognizes, even though we differ, he likes the fact that we are in the trenches fighting like hell to get short-term reductions, because he's worried that if we don't slow down the short-term global warming trend, we will never be able to worry about the long term.
Okay, Dale has the next question.
My question has to do with subsidies. No one ever mentions the cost of keeping the oil lanes around the world open, the cost of global conflict. McKibben said that the oil and gas industry is the only one in the world that pays nothing for its waste disposal. So I guess our legislature probably will not model the legislature in Norway, who just recently passed a carbon tax on all their oil fields in the North Sea, and they plan to take the millions of dollars that they generate from that to plant trees and help developing nations to move toward a more sustainable thing. What are your feelings about any chances of legislative action happening this January?
In Texas, you've got to talk about it differently and show other benefits. So there's a reason why I'm saying doing something about global warming is good for our economy. And it's a reason why I talk about the future and the past, because for all of our arrogance in Texas about we're number one, we can use that to be number one in something other than oil and gas. And we do like to think that we do something about the future. So I think we got to use that message. Nationally, I don't know what to think, really. The last few years have been so poisoned. Some people think whoever wins the presidency, it'll be better. I think they said that before Obama was elected, too, that he could make it better, and just folks attacked him from every side. There is one little interesting trend that we're trying to get our arms around. There are some Republicans who are starting to talk about a carbon tax as part of a larger deal, which would be to either lower the corporate tax rate and replace the revenue with a carbon tax, and or keep the Bush 2 tax breaks for the wealthy, rich, in place in return for a carbon tax. Can't quite tell how serious that is. We actually have some of our Republican staff members who are trying to see if that's possible. Obviously, there are lots of other issues at play there. They're not all environmental equity issues. They're at play. Maybe we could actually pay down some of the deficit with that money. There's some deficit hawks who are willing to do that. So there might be a little opening for a carbon tax. I can't tell yet whether that's true or not. But I guess we're looking, if there is an opening, maybe trying to figure out a way to move that along.
What about the Texas legislature?
Well,
more wind, more solar.
yeah, we have several ideas about solar, and we also I'll tell you a little highlight of something we're working on. You probably read that we haven't been building power plants in recent years. Unintended consequences of our market. Nobody guessed that gas prices would plummet, and for very complicated reasons, it makes it hard to even want to build a gas plant, basically because the clearing prices for an old plant that has no construction or capital cost versus the cost of paying off the capital of the new plant plus its operating costs. So we've come close a few times to not having enough power on hot days. And a couple of days in June this year, we would have, if one plant had gone down, we'd had rolling blackouts. We were really lucky. Every plant worked that day. And that's pretty unusual. Usually some plant's down for something for a while. And the projection is by 2014, even if every plant was working every day, we're going to be short power. So we're working with an interesting coalition of technology companies, some of the utilities, Walmart, some other big customers to do something called demand response, which is to use these technologies to move our demand, our load, to other times a day and change the market where Walmart could bid into the power demand, but rather than saying we're going to generate power, we'll cut down dramatically our use of that time of day, and you can act as if that were part of what we need. And a technology company could say, all the members of the Unitarian Church here are going to agree to cycle off their air conditioner for half an hour or 15 minutes during these hours, and we'll get that load back into the system, and you pay us for it as if we are generating electricity. I think it's a great opportunity. It could lower our cost. It could mean we use the power plants we have now more efficiently and reduce pollution. So that's going to be a big push. I actually think we might be able to pass that because a crisis is out there. No matter what your politics are, if you're in office and the lights go off, that's bad politics for you. That's really bad. And trust me, if the lights go off, or people like me saying, Governor Perry's fault. And he has some interest because I think he understands how that works, and some of the smarter legislators understand it's a real problem.
Okay.
It's called demand response. A broader name is demand side resources, but demand response is when you have peak needs and you're in trouble, either aggregating big residential customers or big box stores or industrial customers agree to cut their demand. It's happening in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. They now have 12,000 megawatts, equivalent of, what would that be, 24 coal plants. Or they're operating their system like that. Alcoa was going to shut a power plant down in Illinois. They figured out we can make more money using our electricity on and off and shifting our load to night. They kept a plant on in Illinois. You know, we should have done that in Rockdale. That plant would be operating, but we don't have the right system, the right policies.
Okay, I think we have time for two more quick questions, if we will.
I don't know if this is a quick one. We have a situation here where 98% of the scientists think that global warming is real, and only about 50% of the electorate goes along with this. And I'm wondering if you had any quick arguments if we happen to come into contact with one of these people that could convince them otherwise. The reason I ask this is because I had a friend that was wavering between the two, and so he decided he'd do some research, which meant go on the internet and look at what the real science was. And he did have a science background. And he concluded, on the basis of the number of hits that he got on the internet, that obviously the global warming was not real. It was a hoax. And it's because if you go that way, you don't distinguish between good science and bad science. But in terms of just the number of places that you could look, the hoaxers are ahead of us.
Yeah. Number one, I think a lot of reasons why people want to deny the science is they're not sure they like the solutions. So you don't like the solution, you don't want to admit there's a problem. So one reason why I'm working so hard on solutions that Americans live with is to make them more comfortable that it's all right to admit there's a real problem. And I try to do three things on the science. I kind of highlighted two of them. Number one, if they actually are real scientists or at all, try to make it very simple to explain that what this is adding the equivalent of glass to a greenhouse. And we're making the glass thicker and less heat is escaping. Basic physics. And nobody denies that the glass is getting thicker in terms of the number of molecules of greenhouse gases. So that's for people who actually could pass an 8th grade science class. Most Americans may not be able to do that, but there are some. 2, I try to go to credible sources, and if they were smart, they would agree that, the fact that every National Academy of Sciences in the industrialized world says unanimously global warming is happening, it's caused by humans. But for some reason, people don't really understand who the National Academy of Sciences are, so I go to A&E like I did at kind of the end of the talk. The Aggies say it's true, and every one of them do, and if you can't, find one department in the world that has a unanimous group to the contrary. And the third thing I also do is say, how long you lived here? When was it 112 in Dallas before? Do you understand that 9 of the 10 hottest days, the hottest years on history have been in this decade? Trust what you see and feel. And I actually think that works for folks, too, on the science. Make them deny what they observe.
Okay, we really have just about 1 more minute, so.
Do you know of any other countries that are doing as well as we're doing, and do you share information with other countries?
Oh, yeah. So look, the U.S. has bad overall policies, but we have some good things we're doing. What Obama did on cars, the single biggest thing to reduce greenhouse pollution in the history of the world. What Texas did on wind to jumpstart wind for the country, a big deal. But there are countries doing a lot more. Europe's doing a lot more. Australia, that has a lot of coal, new government said we're going to solve the problem and put in a cap and trade system. China is putting the cap and trade system on carbon on a pilot basis. So a lot of countries are doing better than us, though we ought to applaud, as you did, about some things we have done well. Thank you all for being here.
Okay. Thank you so much.